Well, welcome to the very first podcast of I Ain't Never Met a Preacher Like You. This will be the first time. It'll get better as we go along, but I think more than anything, I think you'll enjoy some of it. The title of this came from from a time when Karen and I went to a place in Apalachicola. You know, Apalachicola claims they have the best oysters they claim in America, and we went up there in a little place called the Hole in the Wall, and we sat at this table, four-seater, and right behind Karen was a guy who just kept staring at us. And I thought, oh my goodness, this guy can't pay for his bill. But so when Karen got up to go to the bathroom, you know, I was sitting there in my regular Floridian garb, the Panama hat, glasses. You know, I was looking cool. I mean, it took me 70 years to be this cool, and I'm going to flaunt it a little bit. So anyway, he sits in Karen's chair, and he looks at me after a while, and he says, "You're somebody famous, aren't you?" And I say, "Well, I preach on the beach. I used to be a minister. I used to be a school teacher. Kind of that question that was asked. He asked me something I waited for all my life." And he said, "You're a preacher?" And then he said, "The title of this podcast, I ain't never seen a preacher like you." So let's just talk for the first one. I got lots of great interviews and a lot of interesting people for you to meet. You know, when I do a wedding, of course, they always want that first Corinthians chapter. Love is patient, love is kind, doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, you know. It's not proud. It doesn't seek favor, or it doesn't get angry easy. That's a big one. It doesn't delight in evil. It rejoices in good. It always protects. It always hopes. Here's the bottom line is, it's never fail. It never fails. In fact, the Bible says if you don't have love, you know, nothing else really matters. A lot of times when I do premarital counseling, I'll ask them, "Listen, why do you want to get married?" And they'll say, "Because we're in love." And I say, "Well, I love hot dogs, but I'm never going to marry a hot dog." Did you ever love anything so much, or a person so much, that you just couldn't do without him? There's a great story about a guy who married this woman, and the guy asked his wife, "Did you ever love any man before me?" And she thought for a second, and he said, I did have one man. I respected him. He had great intelligence. Another man I met had remarkable courage. I was just captivated by another man who had good looks and he was charming. But with you, I mean, how else could I explain it but it was love? Well, here's an interesting thing. The Bible says you and I are supposed to put on love. It's like getting dressed. You know, you have a choice to put it on in the morning. You have a choice not to do it. In fact, Jesus says the greatest commandment is love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He even says, love your enemies. Well, how do I do that? You know, I'm around weird people. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think I'm the only normal person in the group. Well, let me give you some real quick. The first thing is you got to love people unconditionally, which is very difficult. I heard the story of a guy who was a railroad worker, you know, took the tickets, and somehow he made a mistake, and the guy who was the supervisor came over, and I mean, in front of everybody, just blessed him out unmercifully. And I walked up to the guy later on, and he said, why didn't you walk up to the guy and say, give him a piece of your mind? And the guy said, you know, if a man like that can stand himself all of his life, I can stand him at least for 5 minutes. We're to love other people without any condition. In fact, it says in Romans, you got to love people unconditionally, just like Christ loved you. It says we accept people because Christ accepted us. Jesus accepted people in spite of them. Do you know anybody who's obnoxious? Those people who that you know who are great annoyances to all of us, the people who deserve love the most, just generally receive it the least. Well, that's what I mean by love. Well, the second one is you got to commit to do it. You know, a woman asked her husband, "Darling, will you still love me when my hair turns gray?" And her husband said, well, why not? I stuck with you through the other 6 colors. There's no such thing as love without commitment. I mean, genuine love is a commitment. You have to decide, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be kind. It's not just the feeling that you have inside. It's the point is you got to be devoted to one another. Look, you may have to fight a battle more than once if you're going to win it. Accept other people unconditionally. Commit yourself personally. The third one, which is the one I like, is encourage people continually. There's this wonderful story about this fighter who was, and he had a trainer that kept encouraging him. And sometimes we're kind of like this. The trainer said, listen, between rounds, champ, you're doing great. This guy hadn't laid a stinking glove on you. And the champ said, well, you better keep an eye on the referee because somebody's beating the daylights out of me. 1 Thessalonians says, encourage each other. Build each other up, just as you're doing. And if you love somebody, really, you'll always believe the best about them. Always expect the best. A pat on the back goes a lot further than a kick in the pants. With your kids, they need strokes more than they need pokes, I guess. The choice is you can be a Barnabas or a Barnabas. Here's one that AA uses, and Jesus talked a lot about it, and that is to serve people cheerfully. If you've ever had an angry waitress at a restaurant, you know how bad that is. Cheerfulness is kind of a perfume. You really can't put it on without pouring it on other people yourself. Peter says you should encourage whatever gift you use, you should serve others with it. A long time ago, a guy who founded the Salvation Army, his name was General William Booth. They asked him to speak at a banquet, but he couldn't attend because he was sick. So he just cabled this message to him. It was one word, and that one word was others. Others. See, really, the energy you give off is the energy you receive. I really think that's true. Well, the tough one for a lot of us is to forgive other people. Unforgiveness does more harm to the person it's the person is stored in than to the person is poured on. It's like drinking poison and thinking the other person's going to die. Paul said you got to bear with each other. That's what he says. Whatever grievance you have against another person, you forgive them. There are 2 great marks about a Christian. They're given and they're forgiving. There's a great story about these couple that had been married for 15 years. And so they have this disagreement. And so they decided way they would resolve it is they'd make 2 boxes. And in each box, it would be a complaint against the other. And then after a week, they would open them up. Well, they called it a fault box. Well, the wife, after a week, the wife opened hers first, and the husband opened his first, rather, and it said, leaving the jar off the top of the top off the jar of jelly. Or, you leave wet towels in the shower. You don't put the toilet seat down. Dirty socks in the hamper. But the husband, when the wife opened the one that the husband had made up, it was message after message after message that just said, I love you. Hey, you and I are not the judge of lost causes. Well, share Christ verbally is the last one. John Wesley said, let me tell you, you catch on fire for Christ and people come from miles and watch you burn. You've heard it said, preach the gospel daily, use words if necessary. I have a good friend of mine who's a doctor. He's a surgeon, really. He has Tourette's syndrome. Now, I don't know if you know which Tourette's syndromes are, but those guys, some of those people have facial twitches and they have uncontrollable verbal whoops and beeps, and sometimes they even cuss and swear. This friend of mine, he would have these deep lunging bows. He would bow down to the ground. He'd have a few verbal shouts. Every once in a while, some kind of a compulsive loud word. But he had this compulsive thing about constantly adjusting his glasses. Now you got to remember the kicker is this guy's a doggone surgeon. But somehow, and for some reason, when he put on a mask and a gown and entered an operating room, all the tics disappeared. He lost himself in his role. And when the surgery was finished, he went back to bowing and messing with his glasses again. Now look, this might be a stretch of an illustration. But you and I are to lose ourselves in our role. And that's to love others. And and sometimes when we do that, the little ticks and little mishaps that we have seem to go away. You know, you can have a transformed life when you focus on one or two things, and the bad traits disappear. So here it is: accept others unconditionally, commit yourself to personally to do it, encourage each other continually, serve yourself cheerfully, and forgive others freely. Maybe you could just start with one this week. Just maybe start with accepting other people, even as weird as they are. You know, they say that really loving the Lord is just one hungry person feeding another hungry person a piece of bread. Hey, listen, I'll tell you what to do. Break the rules. Break the rules. And just love everybody. That would be good. See you later, alligator.